Welcome to Inspired Thinkers.
A production of Inspire and Create Co.
Today we're diving into a topic that seems to be gaining a lot of traction these days. Homeschooling.
Yeah.
Whether you're seriously considering it,
Right.
just curious,
Yeah.
or maybe even a little skeptical, we're here to break it all down for you.
Absolutely. It's really interesting
Yeah.
to see how much homeschooling has evolved over the years.
Right.
You know, it's not just a fringe movement anymore.
Right.
We're seeing families from all sorts of backgrounds choosing to educate their kids at home.
Used to be, people thought homeschooling was just for like the super religious families.
Yeah.
Or kids who couldn't handle traditional school.
Right.
But that stereotype is so outdated.
Totally.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're seeing that's driving this trend is this desire for a more customized learning experience. Parents want an education that really caters to their child's unique strengths and interests.
Right.
And that's something that you can really achieve with homeschooling.
Okay, so let's get specific.
Yeah.
What are some of the key benefits that are drawing families to homeschooling?
Well, one of the big ones is being able to ditch that one-size-fits-all curriculum
Yeah.
and actually create a learning plan that matches your child's pace and style.
Right.
So you can really dive deep into subjects that they're passionate about, and you can provide extra support in areas where they might be struggling.
So it's almost like having a personal tutor for every subject.
In a way, yeah. And there's actually research that backs this up.
Okay.
The National Home Education Research Institute, they've done studies that have found that homeschooled students often score much higher on standardized tests than their public school counterparts.
Interesting.
Significantly higher.
How much higher are we talking?
We're talking like 15 to 30 percentile points higher on average.
Wow. 15 to 30 percentile points.
Yeah.
That's a big difference.
It is. So that's definitely a pretty compelling statistic for a lot of parents.
I can see why parents would be very interested in knowing that.
Yeah.
But what about the social aspect? This is something that I've heard people say
Right.
that homeschooled kids miss out on.
Yeah, that's a really common concern.
Yeah.
But I think it's often based on some outdated assumptions.
Okay.
Because homeschooling doesn't mean that kids are just locked away in their homes all day, every day.
Right.
There are so many opportunities for them to have social interaction.
Like what?
Like homeschool co-ops, for example.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't familiar,
Yeah.
what exactly is a homeschool co-op?
So it's basically a group of homeschooling families who come together.
Yeah.
They pool their resources and their expertise.
Okay.
And they organize things like classes, field trips, sports teams, or social events.
Okay.
So it's a great way for kids to connect with other kids who share similar interests. And it's also a great way for parents to connect with each other and support each other.
So it's like a mini community.
Yeah.
Built around learning.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And besides co-ops, I mean, I imagine there are other options.
Yeah, there are tons of other options.
Like community sports leagues and clubs.
Yep.
Maybe even online communities.
Exactly. And some people argue that actually homeschooled kids develop stronger social skills
Interesting.
because they're interacting with people of all ages and all backgrounds. It's not just kids in their own grade level.
Right.
So they're learning to communicate and collaborate in these diverse settings.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked about the why and some of the potential benefits.
Yeah.
But let's be real.
Right.
Homeschooling is a big commitment.
It is.
It's basically like you're becoming your child's teacher,
Yeah.
principal, guidance counselor,
Exactly.
all rolled into one.
It's true. And that's something that's important to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Because it does require a significant time investment from parents. And it's not always easy.
Right.
Time management is crucial.
Yeah.
You need to be prepared for the workload.
Right.
You're talking about curriculum planning,
Yeah.
record keeping, making sure that your child is meeting educational standards.
Right.
It's a lot.
So speaking of curriculum, where do you even begin?
Yeah.
There are so many different approaches and philosophies out there.
There are.
I mean, it can feel pretty overwhelming.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The sheer number of options can be really daunting. But that's also one of the beautiful things about homeschooling, is that you have this freedom to choose a curriculum that aligns with your child's learning style and your family's values.
Okay, so let's break it down a bit.
Okay.
What are some of the main curriculum approaches that families can consider?
Well, you've got your traditional textbook-based programs,
Yeah.
which are familiar,
Right.
structured.
Yeah.
Then there's unschooling,
Okay.
which is very child-led. Learning revolves around the child's interests
Okay.
and natural curiosity.
Interesting.
And then there are a lot of approaches in between.
Right.
Like, for example, Charlotte Mason,
Okay.
which emphasizes nature study, living books, and narration.
Okay. So there's a lot to consider.
There is.
And I imagine that, like, finding the right curriculum is just the first step.
Right.
You got to create a learning environment. You got to figure out a schedule.
Yep.
And probably deal with a few meltdowns along the way.
Definitely. Homeschooling isn't always sunshine and rainbows.
Right.
There are challenges, just like with any educational approach.
Right.
But the nice thing is that there's also a tremendous amount of support available.
Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of challenges, let's talk about that transition from public school to homeschooling.
Great.
If you're a parent who's been used to, like, sending your kid off on the bus every morning, suddenly becoming their primary educator can feel like a huge shift.
It is a big shift.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to approach it with open communication. Talk to your child about why you're making this change.
Right.
Involve them in the decision-making process as much as possible.
Right.
And really listen to their concerns.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think it's got to be really reassuring for kids to know that their voice is being heard, that they're a part of this journey.
Exactly. And remember, you're not alone in this.
Right.
There's a whole vibrant homeschooling community out there.
Okay.
Full of experienced families who are eager to offer support and advice. So connect with local groups, attend conferences, join online forums. There's a wealth of resources out there.
I love that sense of community, that you're all in this together, figuring it out as you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the benefits, the challenges, the curriculum options, the transition process. Is there anything else we should cover before we wrap up?
You know, there's one more myth that I want to debunk.
Okay.
Which is that some people still believe that homeschooling isn't real education.
Right.
That it lacks rigor or accountability. And that's just not true.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Yeah.
Like, how do you know if your kid is actually learning
Right.
if they're not in, like, a traditional classroom setting?
Well, first of all, remember those studies we talked about from the National Home Education Research Institute?
Right.
Homeschool students are often exceeding their public school peers academically.
Yeah.
And second, homeschooling isn't a free-for-all. Most states have regulations and record-keeping requirements to ensure that homeschooled students are meeting educational standards. And a lot of families choose to have their kids take standardized tests as well.
So there's definitely accountability built in to the system. And honestly, I think the real-world skills that homeschooling can foster, things like independence and self-motivation, problem-solving, those are invaluable.
Absolutely.
No matter what path a child takes in life.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
Those are the skills that are going to set kids up for success in the long run.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation.
Yeah, it has.
I feel like we've really unpacked the world of homeschooling.
We have.
From the motivations behind it to the practical realities of making it work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure discussing this with you.
Likewise.
And I hope this has given our listeners a much deeper understanding of homeschooling.
Right.
And whether it might be the right fit for their families.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you're feeling inspired to explore this further, remember that you're not alone.
You are not alone.
There are amazing resources and communities out there to support you every step of the way.
Exactly. And you know what? You're already listening to one of them.
That's right. Inspired Thinkers is brought to you by Inspire and Create Co.
Yep.
And we are passionate about helping families create enriching learning experiences.
Absolutely.
For their children.
Yeah.
Whether you're homeschooling, supplementing traditional education, or just looking for fun and engaging ways to learn together.
Yeah.
We've got a ton of resources to help you on your journey.
We do. We have more podcast episodes just like this one, diving deep into different educational approaches, parenting topics. Plus, we have insightful blog articles packed with practical tips and expert advice. And of course, we have a curated selection of fun and educational products that'll spark your child's curiosity and make learning an adventure.
So head over to inspirecreateco.com and discover a world of inspiration and creativity for your family.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us on Inspired Thinkers.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time.
See ya.
And it can be a lot to manage.
Yeah.
But that's one of the reasons why that homeschooling community
Right.
can be such a valuable resource.
Okay.
Because you can connect with other families who are going through the same thing.
So you're not alone.
Exactly.
Right.
You know, they can share tips, resources, and just provide that moral support.
Right.
Which can be so important when you're taking on this big responsibility.
Okay. So we've talked about like the nitty-gritty of curriculum and scheduling and all that. But what about the legal side of things?
Okay.
I mean, are there specific laws that govern homeschooling?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And the answer is yes.
Okay.
Every state in the U.S. has its own laws and regulations regarding homeschooling. So it's really important to familiarize yourself with the specific requirements in your state.
Okay.
Some states are very relaxed. Others are much more strict.
Okay. So where can parents find information about like their state's specific requirements?
Well, a good place to start is actually the U.S. Department of Education website.
Okay.
They have a whole section on homeschooling, and they provide links to each state's Department of Education, where you can find detailed information.
Right. So you do your research, you figure out what your state requires.
Right.
Then what?
Well, then the fun begins, because you get to start designing your child's education, choosing your curriculum, planning your activities, and creating that unique learning experience that really works for your child.
And what about like assessments and testing? I mean, how does that work in a homeschooling environment?
So, again, it really varies by state.
Okay.
Some states have very specific testing requirements. Others are much more flexible.
Right.
Some families choose to follow a traditional testing schedule. You know, they'll administer standardized tests at certain intervals. Other families prefer to use more informal assessments, like portfolios or project-based evaluations.
So there's a lot of flexibility.
There is. And I think that's one of the things that appeals to a lot of homeschooling families is that they have the freedom to choose what works best for them.
Okay, now let's talk about some of the common misconceptions about homeschooling, because I think there are a lot of them out there.
There are. One of the biggest ones is that homeschooling isolates kids, that they don't get enough social interaction.
And we touched on this earlier.
Right.
With the homeschool co-ops, things like that.
Exactly. But I think it's important to emphasize that homeschooling doesn't mean social isolation.
Right.
There are so many ways for homeschoolers to connect with others. Like we talked about co-ops, sports teams, clubs, community groups, online communities.
Yeah.
The possibilities are really endless.
And I think sometimes homeschool kids actually have more diverse social interactions than kids who are in traditional schools.
I agree. Because they're not limited to just interacting with kids their own age, in their own classroom.
Yeah.
They're out in the community. They're interacting with people of all ages, all backgrounds.
Okay. What about another common misconception?
Okay.
That homeschooling is just for like super academic kids.
Yeah, that's another big one.
Like kids who are already like gifted and talented. But the truth is that homeschooling can actually be a great option for kids who are struggling in a traditional school setting.
Interesting.
Because it allows you to really tailor the education to meet their specific needs.
So if a child has like learning differences or they have like anxiety or social challenges, homeschooling can be a way to create a more supportive and comfortable learning environment.
Exactly. It takes away some of those pressures and those distractions that they might be facing in a traditional classroom.
Right. So it's not just for the super high achiever.
No, not at all. It's for everyone.
Okay.
Really.
What about the idea that, like, homeschool kids aren't prepared for college or the real world? Okay.
That's another one I've heard.
Yeah, that's another common one. But again, I think the research actually shows the opposite.
Okay.
Studies have found that homeschoolers are actually more likely to be accepted to college. And they often perform better academically once they get there.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah. And in terms of preparing for the real world, I think homeschooling provides a lot of valuable skills, like self-direction, time management, problem solving. These are all skills that employers are looking for.
Absolutely.
So I think homeschoolers are actually very well equipped to succeed in the real world.
Okay, so we've debunked a lot of misconceptions here.
We have.
But let's be honest. Homeschooling isn't for everyone.
Right.
It's a big decision.
It is.
And it requires a lot of commitment and dedication.
Yeah, and I think it's important for families to really do their research, weigh the pros and cons, and decide if it's the right fit for them. It's not a decision to be taken lightly.
Right.
But for those families who do choose homeschooling, it can be an incredibly rewarding experience.
So what advice would you give to families who are considering homeschooling?
Well, I would say, first of all, do your research, like we've been talking about. Learn about the laws in your state, explore different curriculum options, talk to other homeschooling families, get a sense of what it really involves. And then I would say be flexible. Homeschooling is a journey.
Right.
And it's going to evolve over time.
Yeah.
What works for your family, 1 year might not work the next year.
Right.
So be open to adjusting and adapting as you go along. And most importantly, don't be afraid to ask for help. There's a whole community out there of people who are willing to support you. So reach out, connect with other families, and, enjoy the journey.
All right, so to wrap things up, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We've explored the benefits, the challenges, the practicalities of homeschooling, and we've hopefully debunked some of the common misconceptions.
Absolutely.
So for our listeners out there who are considering homeschooling, what's the one thing you want them to take away from this conversation?
I think the most important thing is that homeschooling is a viable and legitimate educational option. It's not just for a select few. It's for anyone who is looking for a more personalized and flexible approach to education. So if you're curious, do your research, talk to other families, and see if it might be right for you.
Yeah, and remember, there's a whole community out there ready to support you.
Absolutely. And we're part of that community, too.
That's right.
And we at Inspire and Create Co. want to support you on that journey. So if you're looking for more information, more inspiration, or just, a little boost of creativity, head over to our website, inspirecreateco.com.
All right.
You'll find a ton of resources there. We've got more podcast episodes, insightful blog articles, and, of course, a curated selection of fun and educational products.
Okay, so inspirecreateco.com.
Yes.
Check it out.
Check it out.
Well, this has been a really fascinating look at homeschooling.
It has.
Thanks for sharing all your insights.
My pleasure. It's been great talking with you.
Likewise. And for our listeners, if you're intrigued by homeschooling, do your research, talk to other families, and see if it might be the right fit for you.
Absolutely.
And remember, you are not alone on this journey. You are not alone. There's a whole community out there ready to support you.
That's right. And we're part of that community.
We are.
So thanks for joining us on Inspired Thinkers. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.